"You won't last the night with me," she said, her voice steady as steel, eyes daring me to prove her wrong. "I'm Caleb Rowan, 28 years old, a former paramedic turned security contractor, and I'd just finished installing the latest alarm system in Elena Ashford's penthouse when she issued that challenge." Elena, a 32-year-old self-made security tech mogul worth $30 million, stood by her floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of warning and resignation. "Challenge accepted," I replied, not out of arrogance, but because I'd seen the signs during our 3 weeks of working together, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the triple locked doors, the security monitors flickering in every room like sentinels guarding against invisible threats. She turned sharply, surprised by my answer. "You don't understand what you're agreeing to. 5 men before you have said the same thing. By midnight, they were gone. By dawn, they'd blocked my number. But I wasn't those men. I'd grown up watching my mother battle night terrors after escaping an abusive marriage. I'd spent 7 years as an EMT pulling people back from their darkest moments. I knew what trauma looked like when it wore expensive clothes and lived in a fortress disguised as a luxury apartment." "What happened to you?" I asked gently, watching her jaw tighten. She didn't answer immediately, just stared out at the city lights as if they held secrets she couldn't share. When she finally spoke, her words came out measured, practiced, like she'd rehearsed this rejection speech before. "2 years ago, someone broke in. I fought him off, but I haven't slept through a single night since. What you see now, this successful businesswoman, she only exists during daylight. After dark, I become someone else entirely. Someone no one can handle." The way she said it, so matter of fact, so defeated, told me she'd already written me off. But what she didn't know was that I'd been falling for her since the day she'd corrected my wiring schematic with the confidence of someone who'd built her empire from nothing. What she didn't know was that I noticed her hands trembling when she signed the final installation papers that afternoon. What she didn't know was that I wasn't here just to prove a point. I was here because watching her suffer alone was no longer an option I could live with. "So what happens tonight?" I asked, setting down my tool bag deliberately, making it clear I wasn't leaving. "What am I really accepting?" She studied me for a long moment, searching for the cracks, the moment I had realized my mistake and retreat. Then she walked to her liquor cabinet, poured herself 2 fingers of whiskey she wouldn't drink, and said, "At 10 p.m., the first nightmare comes. By midnight, I'll have my first panic attack. At 2 a.m., I'll try to force you out because I can't bear watching another person look at me with pity. By 4 a.m., you'll see me at my absolute worst. And if by some miracle you're still here at dawn." She paused, her voice cracking just slightly. "Well, no one's ever made it to dawn." I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. 1 hour and 13 minutes until the first test. "Then, I guess we're about to make history," I said, meeting her disbelieving gaze with steady certainty. But as the Los Angeles skyline began to darken outside those massive windows, and as I watched Elena's entire body language shift from corporate confidence to something fragile and guarded, one question burned through my mind. What exactly had happened during that home invasion that left a woman this strong so utterly convinced she was unlovable after dark? And what would I discover about Elena Ashford in the next 9 hours that 5 other men couldn't handle the truth she was so certain would send me running before the sun ever had a chance to rise? The next hour passed in careful silence. Elena moved through her penthouse like a soldier preparing for battle. She checked every lock twice, her fingers running along the deadbolts with practiced precision. She adjusted the security monitors, their blue glow casting shadows across her face that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the corporate titan I'd watched negotiate million-dollar contracts over speakerphone. I watched her pull blackout curtains across those massive windows, sealing us into a cocoon of artificial light. The city disappeared. We were alone. "You can still leave," she said without looking at me, her hand hovering over the final curtain. "No judgment, no hard feelings. Just walk out that door and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd given this same out to others before, someone who expected me to take it. I stayed planted on her leather couch, my boots still dusty from the day's work. "I'm not going anywhere, Elena." She let the curtain fall. The room felt smaller now, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the walls closing in. She sat in the chair across from me, her posture rigid, hands gripping the armrests like she was strapped into a roller coaster waiting for the drop. "Tell me about your mother," she said suddenly. "You mentioned her night terrors. What were they like?" The question caught me off guard, but I understood what she was doing. Testing, measuring, trying to gauge if I really knew what I was signing up for or if I was just another well-meaning fool who thought love could fix everything. She'd wake up screaming, I said honestly. 3, 4 times a night sometimes. She'd be back in that house, back with him, reliving every moment. My brothers would hide under their blankets, but I learned to sit with her, hold her hand, remind her where she was, who she was, that she was safe. Elena's grip on the armrests loosened slightly. "And did it help? Your being there?" I nodded. "Eventually, not right away. It took years. But she learned to trust that when she woke up, someone would be there. That she wasn't alone in it anymore." Something flickered across Elena's face. Hope, maybe, or the memory of hope before it had been beaten down by disappointment. The last one, Marcus, he lasted until 3 a.m., made it further than most. He held me through the first nightmare, talked me down from the panic attack, but when I woke up the second time, when the screaming started again, I saw it in his eyes. That look, like he'd signed up for one horror show and didn't realize it was a double feature. Her voice dropped lower. He left while I was in the bathroom. Didn't even say goodbye. Just texted me 2 days later that he couldn't be what I needed, like I was a broken appliance he tried to fix and given up on. The bitterness in her words was sharp enough to cut. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, closing the distance between us without invading her space. "I'm not Marcus, and you're not broken. You're surviving. There's a difference." "Is there?" she asked. And for the first time since I'd met her, I heard genuine question in her voice instead of challenge. Because from where I'm sitting, surviving looks a lot like being broken. I built a $30 million company, protecting people from the exact thing that destroyed me. I live in a fortress. I barely sleep. I push away everyone who gets close. Tell me how that's not broken, Caleb. Before I could answer, her watch beeped. 9:47 p.m. 13 minutes to the first nightmare. Elena stood abruptly, her movements jerky with tension. "I'm going to change into something more comfortable. When I come back, we'll order dinner. Try to act normal for a little while longer. Pretend this is just a regular evening." She paused at her bedroom door, her back to me. "Thank you for staying this long. Most don't make it past the explanation." I waited until her door closed, then stood and walked to those covered windows. I pulled back one curtain slightly, just enough to see the city lights stretching endlessly below. Somewhere down there, millions of people were living their normal lives, unaware of the battle about to be fought in this sealed penthouse. I thought about my mother, about the nights I'd spent as a kid listening to her cry, feeling helpless and small. I thought about my years as a paramedic, about all the people I'd held together in their worst moments and all the ones I couldn't save. But this was different. This wasn't a stranger bleeding out in an ambulance or a patient I'd hand off at the emergency room doors. This was Elena, the woman who'd spent 20 minutes explaining the architectural flaws in my security installation with such passion I'd fallen a little in love with her brilliant, complicated mind. The woman who'd brought me coffee every morning, remembering after one conversation that I took it black with one sugar. The woman who'd laughed at my terrible jokes about circuit breakers and made me feel like maybe I wasn't just a washed-up paramedic scraping by with contractor work. The bedroom door opened. Elena emerged wearing simple gray sweatpants and an oversized Georgetown hoodie that had seen better days. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders, and without her corporate armor of tailored suits and perfect makeup, she looked softer, younger, more like the girl she must have been before the world taught her to build walls. "Georgetown?" I asked, gesturing at the hoodie. She managed a small smile. "Undergrad, computer science, and business. Seems like a lifetime ago. Back when I could sleep in dorm rooms and not check the locks 17 times. We ordered Thai food, her choice, and for 30 minutes we almost pulled off normal. She told me about building her first security system in college, how she'd started with a dorm room prototype and turned it into a patent that launched her company. I told her about the worst call I'd ever responded to as a paramedic. A 5-car pileup where I'd held a dying man's hand and lied to him that his family was okay. We laughed. We ate pad thai straight from the containers. For 30 beautiful minutes, I saw who Elena Ashford was when she wasn't at war with herself. Then her phone alarm went off. 10 p.m. exactly. The color drained from her face. She set down her food, her hands starting to tremble. "It's time," she said quietly. "I need to lie down now." The nightmare always comes within minutes of 10. It's like my brain has a schedule. She stood, swaying slightly, and I reached out to steady her. She flinched at the touch but didn't pull away. "You can sit in the chair next to the bed. Don't touch me when it starts unless I'm hurting myself. Don't try to wake me up too quickly. Just be there. Or don't. The door's unlocked. You can still leave." I followed her into the bedroom. It was sparse, almost monastic. A king-size bed with military-tight corners, a single nightstand with medications lined up like soldiers, a chair positioned exactly where she directed me to sit. No photos, no personal items, nothing that would anchor her to good memories. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin despite the warmth of the room. Her eyes found mine in the dim light from the hallway. "Caleb, when you see what happens, when you see who I become, remember that I warned you. Remember that I gave you a chance to leave." Then she closed her eyes, and I watched the strongest woman I'd ever met transform into someone small and scared, waiting for the demons to come. The nightmare hit at 10:07 p.m. One moment, Elena was lying still, her breathing steady and controlled. The next, her entire body went rigid. Her eyes snapped open, but she wasn't seeing this room, this safety, this moment. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and terrible that only she could see. A low whimper escaped her throat, then another, building into something that made my chest tighten. Her hands clutched the sheets, twisting them into knots. Then the screaming started. It wasn't the scream of someone startled or scared. This was primal, the sound of a person fighting for their life. Her body thrashed against invisible attackers, her legs kicking, her arms swinging at shadows only she could see. "No, no, get off me, get away," she gasped between screams, her voice raw and desperate. I stayed in the chair like she'd instructed, every instinct in my body screaming to intervene, but I knew better. This wasn't my fight to interrupt, this was hers to survive while I kept watch. She rolled violently to her side, nearly falling off the bed. I moved then, not to wake her, but to position myself so she wouldn't hit the floor. Her fist connected with my shoulder, hard enough to bruise, but I barely felt it. I'd taken worse in the field. What hurt was watching her relive this horror, seeing the terror etched into every line of her face. "You're safe, Elena," I said quietly, not expecting her to hear but needing to say it anyway. "You're in your home. You're safe. I'm here." The nightmare lasted 12 minutes. When she finally woke, she came up gasping like someone pulled from deep water, her eyes wild and unfocused. It took her a full 30 seconds to remember where she was, who I was. When recognition finally dawned, something worse than the terror appeared in her eyes. Shame. Deep, crushing shame that made her turn away from me, her shoulders shaking. "That's number one," she whispered hoarsely, her voice wrecked from screaming. "Still think you can make it to dawn?" I reached for the water bottle on her nightstand and held it out to her. She took it with trembling hands, drinking deeply, avoiding my gaze. "What time is it?" she asked. 10:19, I replied. She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. 9 hours and 41 minutes to go. You've barely started. The hours that followed were a descent into Elena's private hell, and I was her only witness. At midnight, just as she'd predicted, the panic attack hit. We were in the living room. She'd insisted on getting out of bed, pacing the length of her penthouse like a caged animal, checking locks and security monitors compulsively. Then suddenly she stopped mid-stride, her hand going to her chest. "I can't breathe," she gasped, her eyes going wide with terror. "Caleb, I can't breathe. Something's wrong." I recognized the signs immediately. Hyperventilation, racing heart, the absolute conviction that death was imminent. I guided her to the couch, sat beside her, and took her hand. You're having a panic attack. Your body thinks you're in danger, but you're safe. I need you to breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She shook her head violently. I can't, I'm dying, something's wrong, call 911. But I held her hand firmer, my voice steady and calm. You're not dying. I've seen people die. This isn't it. Breathe with me, Elena. In, 2, 3, 4. It took 20 minutes to talk her down. 20 minutes of counting breaths and reminding her that her body was lying to her, that the danger had passed 2 years ago. When her breathing finally normalized, she collapsed against the couch, exhausted and humiliated. 2 down, she whispered. Now comes the part where I try to make you leave. She was right. At 2 a.m., after another nightmare had ripped through her and left her shaking, Elena turned on me. Why are you still here? She demanded, her voice sharp with anger that was really directed at herself. What do you want from me? Pity? The satisfaction of playing hero? You think if you stick around long enough, I'll fall into your arms grateful and fixed? The words were designed to wound, to push me away, to confirm her belief that she was too much for anyone to handle. I met her anger with quiet truth. I'm here because I care about you, because I've watched you for 3 weeks being brilliant and strong and terrified all at once, because you deserve to have someone stay. She stood abruptly, crossing to the window, her back to me. Everyone says that. Then they see this, and they realize I'm not worth the trouble. I'm not some project you can fix, Caleb. I'm broken in ways that don't heal. I stood too, but I didn't approach her. You're right. You're not a project. You're a person who survived something horrific, and maybe you'll always carry these scars. Maybe the nightmares never completely stop, but that doesn't mean you have to face them alone. That doesn't mean you're unlovable. She turned then, tears streaming down her face. How can you say that? You've seen what I am at night. You've heard me scream. You've watched me fall apart. And I'm still here, I said simply. That's the point, Elena. I'm still here. The fourth moment came at 4 a.m., the darkest hour before dawn. Another nightmare, worse than the others, pulled her under. This time she didn't just relive the attack. She relived the aftermath. The police questions. The trial that never happened because there wasn't enough evidence. The therapist who couldn't help. The fiancé who left. Every abandonment, every disappointment, every moment she'd been told to move on and get over it, all of it came pouring out in broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. I moved to the bed then, rules forgotten, and I held her. Not to stop the pain, but to anchor her through it. She fought me at first, tried to push me away, but I held on. I've got you, I repeated over and over. I've got you. You're safe. I'm not leaving. I've got you. Slowly, gradually, her resistance crumbled, and she clung to me, crying into my chest with a rawness that spoke of 2 years of holding everything in. When the storm finally passed, when her tears ran dry and exhaustion pulled her under, she whispered against my shoulder, "Why won't you leave?" And I whispered back, "Because I love you." Not the version of you that exists during the day, all of you, the nightmares included. At 6:14 a.m., as the first rays of sunlight began to pierce through the gaps in the curtains, Elena opened her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, she'd slept for more than an hour without waking. She blinked up at me, confused, then remembered. "You stayed," she said, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "You actually stayed." I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I told you I would." She sat up slowly, looking toward the windows where dawn was breaking. 5 times, she said quietly. "You proved me wrong 5 times before dawn. The nightmare, the panic attack, when I tried to push you away, when I broke down, and now. You're still here in the morning." Tears welled in her eyes again, but these were different. Not tears of pain, but of something that looked dangerously close to hope. "No one's ever made it to dawn," she repeated her words from hours ago, but now they carried a different meaning. I took her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "Then I guess we really did make history." She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, and together we watched the sun rise over Los Angeles. The night had tested us both in ways I'd never fully anticipated, but we'd survived it, together. "Caleb, she said softly. Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me. I kissed the top of her head gently. Thank you for letting me stay. The nightmares wouldn't disappear overnight. The panic attacks wouldn't magically stop. Healing would take time, patience, and probably more dark nights than either of us could count. But as we sat there in the growing light, Elena's hand in mine, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never have to face those nights alone again. Challenge accepted, challenge won. Not because I'd fixed her or saved her, but because I'd simply stayed. And sometimes that's all love really is. The choice to stay when everything else says run. The promise that when darkness falls, you won't be alone. The certainty that someone will still be there when dawn finally breaks. So where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that everyone has battles we can't see, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because everyone deserves someone who stays. Everyone deserves their own dawn. And maybe, just maybe, you needed to hear that today.